Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada. In episode 32, we speak with Dr. Layne Norton about the science of size.
So Layne, I first heard about you through, and you're going to laugh, but Generation Iron. So it was, so that had to be what, 6 years ago when that movie came out?
I think it was, about 5 years ago. Yeah, hard to believe.
So can you describe your background? Because you are officially a doctor, correct?
Ph.D.
Ph.D.
I have a bachelor's in biochemistry and then a Ph.D. in nutritional sciences.
Awesome. And you've pretty much made a career on studying the human body and hypertrophy and powerlifting. So you really kind of live in that power building realm, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, basically, depending on how you look at it, I'm a meathead who likes science, or I'm a geek who likes weightlifting, whichever way you choose.
They both sound good to me. But so did you work out of, was it the University of Tampa for a while, or what was it exactly? Or am I getting that?
I had a little bit of an affiliation for a little while there, and would go down and with Generation Iron, I would see Ben whenever he was, doing some of his testing and whatnot. But no, I went to the University of Illinois, which is where I did my research and my graduate work. So that was kind of, I went to Eckerd College for my undergraduate, which is in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm originally from Indiana, but I like warm weather. So I moved down there for college. When I was done, I wanted to stay in Florida, but there's no programs that were studying. I wanted to study protein and protein metabolism and body composition. But there's really, there's only a few labs in the world. Now there's more, but back then, almost 14 years ago, there was no labs really studying what I wanted to study, unless it was like Illinois, Penn State, Wisconsin, some places in California. So Illinois was kind of close to where I was born, and I went and I interviewed with different labs, and I just really liked Dr. Layman, who was my PhD advisor. He was probably the most intelligent person with regards to metabolism I've ever met in my life. Still to this day, he'll kick my butt on metabolism stuff. But I was very fortunate to study under him, and I'm really happy I made the choice to go to the University of Illinois. It was a great experience.
So, I've been a strength coach and trainer in New York City for about 20 years. And, I own a few businesses, and I'm very passionate about this, and I really live this. And from following you and checking out your website, I think it's biolayne.com, correct?
Yep, that's right.
I mean, it's evident that you truly love this. You're obviously an incredibly strong guy, but you've competed in several bodybuilding competitions?
Yeah, I actually started out as a bodybuilder. I got into bodybuilding when I was about 18 years old. Did my first competition when I was 19. I won the team division and then was hooked. And I was really in there was natural bodybuilding competitions, the drug testing competitions. I started doing those quite a bit, and my goal was to win my natural pro card before I was 25, which I did at age 24. And then did my first series of natural pro shows when I was 28 years old. I literally just graduated with my PhD, and I won one pro show, and I placed top 5 in all of the pro shows I did. But then I kind of fell in love with powerlifting after that. I love bodybuilding, but there's, bodybuilding, you're basically a show pony on show day. There's no real athleticism to it. You could argue that posing is athletic, but, I loved the idea of, taking some of the subjectivity out of things, and either you lift it or you don't. And also, I started doing powerlifting more just to keep you motivated in the off-season for bodybuilding, because training would get really stale if you weren't training for a particular show. So I started doing powerlifting meets just a way for myself to stay motivated in the off-season, and I ended up falling in love with that, and probably am better at that than I was at bodybuilding. I won 2 national titles, and then Went to the World Championships in 2015 and placed second in my weight class, and set what was then a world record in the squat. And unfortunately, powerlifting for a long time had a lot of different organizations. And if you talk to anybody who's been a powerlifter, all of them are like, oh yeah, I set this world record or whatever. Not to sound like an elitist, but I competed in the IPF, which is the biggest organization in the world. And at that world championship, there's over 50 different countries were represented. And you had to win the national championship to get invited to this. This is not something that you can just, and you can't set a world record in the IPF if it's not a world level meet. So you can't just go to your backyard meet and just set a world record with your buddies judging you in a garage.
No. This is the real deal. What did you total? What did you total at?
So my squat was 668 pounds. I bench pressed 381 pounds, and I deadlifted 711 pounds. So my total world championship was 1758. What was
your current body weight?
I competed in the 205-pound class, and I weighed in that day at 201.5 pounds.
That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. So listen, I mean, I know it sounds like I'm doing a lot of the talking, and I know Derek's going to chime in a little bit, but it's funny coming up in the strength and conditioning world and the bodybuilding world. And I've never competed, but I kind of live in this performance physique world. There's always been this battle between the two. And you know what I'm talking about. I mean, bodybuilders will turn around and say powerlifters look like shit. Powerlifters will turn around and say bodybuilders aren't strong. I almost just wish they can all get along. There's so much value to each of them. And I see a lot of, and I consider you more of a power builder, like more of a power bodybuilder, because you are strong as hell. But when you dive into science and you look at there's so much different research showing that rep ranges to train at if you're a bodybuilder, but there is a ton of value for a bodybuilder to pick up heavy shit. I mean, do you agree or disagree? Can you explain to us some of the science for some guys? Because everyone's goals that I come around is they want to be a superhero. They want to be strong as hell. I want to deadlift 600 pounds. I'm still working on that. But I walk around and my body fat's really low. So these are goals that I have. But can you dive into the science a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the science says that there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat when it comes to building muscle. And if you look at the research, you can build, at least if you look at like 12-week studies, 16-week studies, the amount of hypertrophy you can create is similar between most different rep ranges, as long as you're training close to exhaustion, right? So they've shown in studies you can grow muscle training like 30-40% of your 1 rep max. But you've got to go, that means you're going to have to go really high rep, because to get close to exhaustion is going to be, 60, 70, 80, 90 reps. Now, I think one thing those studies miss is if you're looking at long term, you have to always continue. The one major overriding factor towards continuing to force adaptation in the body, which whether it be strength or hypertrophy, is you have to continue to create progressive overload. You have to continue to give your body a reason to adapt. And so one of the ways to create progressive overload is to lift more weight. Now, we cannot get stronger indefinitely. Otherwise, everybody would squat 1,000 pounds, right? So volume is another form of overload. And most bodybuilders produce overload through volume. They do, a lot of, higher reps, those sorts of things. But the thing that I think a lot of people miss is that if you train in the strength rep ranges of, 1 to 5, if you create those neural adaptations that make you stronger, if you're stronger when you go lift in the 8 to 12, 12 to 15, whatever higher rep range, now you can create more overload overall, more stimulus, with still the same amount of sets, right? Because you can always say, well, you can just add more sets if you want to create more overload. You can. The problem is that from a practicality standpoint, like how many sets do you want to add to your workout, right? Whereas if you could just lift more weight with the same amount of sets, you can create that stimulus. So I think that there's many ways to skin a cat. I think that it probably is important to pick up heavy shit, here and there, even if you're a bodybuilder. I just find it fun. To be honest, can I curse?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Come on. I'm from New York, baby.
I hate fucking training with lightweights. Like, it just is not, it is
Why
not
not?
enjoyable.
Why not do both though? I mean, I know, it's always, keep the goal, and you can't, do too much because you're going to remove, from, becoming really strong if you're training in a hypertrophy zone. But if the majority of the people out there kind of want to be the jack of all trades and, are saying, well, listen, if I deadlift 600 instead of 650, I'm okay with that. If it takes away from being optimal, why not train in both? Why not start and do 3s and 5s and then train the shit out of those, higher rep ranges?
So I think if you're somebody who, like, for example, everything's a trade-off, right? And everything can impact everything else. So, when is it not appropriate to do something like a 600-pound deadlift if you're a bodybuilder? If you're trying to be Mr. Olympia, right? If deadlifting that much weight causes to negatively impact your recovery to the point where you can't, complete a hypertrophy style back workout with the same level of intensity and volume that you normally would, well, then maybe it's not appropriate, right? But if you want the best of, you can never have the best of all worlds. That's just, everything's a trade-off. But if you want to be strong and you want to be in really great shape, well then yes, use a variety. And also there is, when you look at periodization, like changing your rep schemes, there is something to be said for variety. Having a variety of repetition ranges seems to, we don't exactly understand how, but having that variety seems to produce a little bit better results on strength and hypertrophy than just sticking in one rep range.
Right.
This stuff is very complicated though, because it's never just, people want to boil it down to, just train heavy, or, it's just get a pump, or, all that stuff probably has impacts. The crazy thing is we still don't exactly understand exactly how muscle growth works. So it's, we know that volume and progressive overload seem to be the biggest drivers. Although now there's a new theory that it's more of effective volume, what we call effective volume, because I could put a bar on my back and do, 1,000 reps, you know what I mean, over the course of a couple hours. But am I really going to grow muscle from that? Probably not.
Can I ask you a question about like occlusion? Because this has been coming up. And
Yeah.
I don't know what the mechanism there is. Maybe you can explain a bit to us, Layne, what's happening with the occlusion?
So there's blood flow restriction or occlusion, as you mentioned, is a technique that was originally called katsuin from Japan, where you're restricting venous return of blood flow. So if I want to work, like say my biceps, if I use some kind of cuff that will restrict blood flow, it can have some benefits. So you're not trying to restrict or stop the blood flow into the muscle, you're trying to restrict the venous return. And the arterial pressure delivering blood is stronger than that returns it. So by using a certain pressure of cuff, you can kind of still get blood flow delivery and restrict the return. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, the research shows that you can train with really light weights and still produce hypertrophy. Now, that being said, when they first discovered this effect, they hadn't really studied training to failure or training near failure with light loads. So now we know that you can actually create, there's a new paper out, you can create the same hypertrophy just training a light weight, the same amount of weight to failure, non-occluded or occluded. It doesn't seem to matter. That being said, the benefit to blood flow restriction is you can make it happen faster. And let me give again, if you're using 20% of a 1 rep max, how many reps can I do? Well, like an untrained person could probably do, an untrained person could do 60, 70, 80 till they get really uncomfortable. A trained person can do probably over 100, right? Like they could do a lot of reps. And so like me, I would just get fucking bored, and can you ever, it's really hard to hit true failure with that kind of weight. So what blood flow restriction does is it speeds up that process because It's been shown because you're restricting blood flow, you're restricting a little bit of oxygen, you pre-fatigue those slow twitch type 1 fibers. And so then you start to preferentially activate those type 2 fast twitch fibers. The other thing it does is cause a lot of a fluid shift and fluid accumulation in that area. And we think that that's one of the other ways it produces benefits. But yeah, I don't think there's anything magic to it necessarily. I just think that, it kind of speeds up that process of hitting fatigue. Now, there is one thing that I should mention, and Dr. Lineker has made a good point of this. Dr. Lineker does a lot of the studies on blood flow restriction. Ironically, I'm the one who actually showed him blood flow restriction about 12 years ago. Sorry, Jeremy, I'm going to take credit. But he's run off and done amazing research with it. But the one difference is that they've shown that people who blood flow restrict, who are untrained, can actually grow muscle in their legs from just walking under blood flow restriction. And if you blood flow restrict people at bed rest, so if you intermittently apply a blood flow restriction to people at bed rest, they lose less muscle than people who don't get it, right?
Wow.
So that seems to be a little bit unique because you can't really walk to failure. You know what I mean? So, I guess you could, but you wouldn't fail because your muscles fatigued. You would just fail from dehydration or something else. So there does seem to be a little bit of something with blood flow restriction. I think the real benefit to blood flow restriction is I don't think it's superior to normal training. I think that it can be a nice mix-up. Anybody who's ever done it also knows that the pump you get from it is pretty incredible. So if you like having a really, really awesome pump, BFR will do that for you. And also people who are injured. There's one, if you can't train heavy, a lot of people can still train with 20% of a 1 rep max and not aggravate an injury. So there's that. There also is some mounting evidence that blood flow restriction actually improves blood flow in the long run. And that improved blood flow may lead to better healing and those sorts of things. There was a case study done where actually it was somebody so I originally met Jeremy from the bodybuilding.com forums. And then we met in person because he was an intern at the University of Illinois when I was doing my Ph.D. there. And he had somebody who messaged him on the bodybuilding.com forums. And this person said, hey, I think I tore my ACL. Can I still keep doing BFR? And Jeremy said, yeah, you can probably do that. I'm not a doctor, but it should be okay. Like if you're just doing leg extensions and nothing lateral. So he just kept doing BFR for a few weeks until he went in, got an x-ray done and an MRI. And the MRI showed that his ACL was not torn. The x-ray showed that he had actually broken his femur.
Oh my God.
It was just very close to it was like a hairline fracture that was close to the knee joint. And so he mistook that pain for actually tearing his ACL. And the doctor said, they took a new x-ray right before surgery. And he said, what have you been doing? And the guy was like, I've just been doing blood flow restriction. He said, well, keep doing it because it's almost healed. So now I don't want to get too carried away because it's just one person. This person may have had faster than abnormal wound healing, that sort of stuff. But there may be some potential benefits with injury rehabilitation, especially for athletes and those sorts of people. So I think it does have applications, but I think that it's not the it's not the end all be all, and it's probably not necessarily better than heavy training. But again, another thing is, like, if you're on the road traveling and you don't have access to heavy weights, if you got bands, you can get a pretty good workout in. So there's benefits to it.
Yeah, I was using it with one of my celebrity clients today. He's getting ready for the movie Shazam. We have our PTs working with him after our session because he's got some tendinosis going on, and specific movements bother him. But I know obviously a lot of these actors have to have good arms, so we're using that as a tool because we really just can't load them that much. You know,
Yeah.
we can't have him do any flexion and extension bothers him, and but doesn't kill him. I mean, obviously, you know, there's specific, you know, angles he can go at that makes him feel all right. It's actually a great tool for us to be able to start with some light loads and just really kind of give him that, even mentally, from a mental standpoint, he feels like he's getting some work in, and you know, he's keeping himself way more positive. But I think it's a great tool. And to be honest with you, when I dove into it years ago, but I think the first time I really committed was, who was I talking to? I thought I was talking to Dr. Gabrielle, and with my own training, I'm so used to writing programs for so many different people. Once in a while, one will come across my desk and I'll jump on it. And for me, that's part of training. It's fun, but rarely do I like just doing a pure bodybuilding program. Yeah. But you had it was honestly, I'm giving you a big pat on the back on this, but it's probably one of the better programs I've ever seen, like, out in mainstream, and you did that power building. What was it? The P3? It was the bench squat deadlift.
Yeah. So
what was it called again?
I had a FAT program, which is one of the original kind of power hypertrophy bodybuilding programs that incorporated heavy lifting and powerlifting into it. But then I had PH3, which was on.
That was it.
Which was kind of squat, bench, deadlift, but also with hypertrophy work.
I thought it was phenomenal. And we actually, my team and I ran through it. I want to say it was for a few months. I mean, it was probably a 3-4 month program. And actually had an incredible response. And I actually stole this from you, but the whole reps in reserve symbol that you started using on there. And I love that because, you know, a lot of times, you know, unfortunately, the general public will look at a program and they're just seeing 4 sets of 10. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? You know, and how do you do a percent? Like, people aren't really, well, what do you mean a percentage? Are you going 80%? Is that RPE? Is that 80% of your 1RM? I mean, it gets a little confusing. Right. And I think the
RPE is a little, you know, people use it differently. And,
I know.
You know, because it's rate of perceived exertion. Like my coach uses RPE. So I work with a guy named Andres Vargas. He does my programming. And he uses RPE, but it's essentially just the inverse of RIR. So if it says RPE 8, it means you're leaving 2 reps in the tank. But see, for me, that seems a little bit weird, because what if you're doing an RPE 8 on a 1 rep max? So that means that normally, or if you're doing a 1 reps at RPE 8, that means it would normally be 3 reps. So it's
light. Yeah, no. I'm completely agreeing with you, but that's
a little bit counterintuitive sometimes. And so I just like RIR because it's just very straightforward. If you're doing a set of 8 with an RIR of 2, that means you could have done 10 before you hit failure, right? Right. That just seems more intuitive to me.
So I thought you did a tremendous job on that program. I loved how you got the big lifts in more frequently. I thought it gave, and I loved how you based the percentages. Yes, we've all been doing percentages for years, but you were really leaving a lot of gas in the tank early on, which I think was really enabling people to get stronger. You know, it's a lot of people, you see it on, you know, with this damn bench press syndrome, where people are asking, why isn't my bench getting stronger? Why isn't it getting stronger? I'm like, well, why is your squat getting stronger? How are you approaching it differently? And they're always leaving reps in reserve. On the squat, they're allowing their body to recover a little bit. Bench, it's always failure. It's always going too heavy, and it's always missing their reps, and they're not developing, and they're not getting stronger. How did you, and this may sound like a weird question, but this is going to give us a general idea on how have you evolved program design since then, or has it stayed the same? Or, you know, now I always like to say, in the beginning of my career, it looked a little bit like a Chinese menu. You know, Monday I squatted, I deadlifted, and I did some accessory work, and I was done for my lower body. I mean, it's pretty damn simple. You know, it's getting more simple as I'm getting older. How has it evolved for you, for someone who wants to come in and they want to be, as you said, strong as fuck, and, you know, built like a freaking, you know, jailhouse strong built, if you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first got into bodybuilding, it was the typical, you do chest on Monday, and then you do legs on Tuesday, and then you do back on Wednesday, and that sort of thing. And, you know, fortunately, I've always been pretty skeptical, I want to say, and willing to question the status quo. And I had there was this guy named, I'll give him some props, Eugene Sanic. He's actually a dermatologist now, but we used to rap on the Mind and Muscle forums back in the day. And this is like back circa 2002, 2003, 2004. And he always said, well, why don't you, my legs were always a big weak point. And he said, why don't you try training them twice a week? I said, well, I can't do that. I'll overtrain. He said, well, based on what? Based on what evidence? And he kind of pushed me to do it, and I noticed a lot of benefits from it. And then I started saying, well, what if all the dogma out there is just, bullshit, and we could try different things? So I've kind of gone through the whole gamut of stuff. I mean, when I was in the Ph.D mode, it was, okay, well, if you want to get stronger at the big lifts, do the big lifts with high volume, high frequency, and which worked, and I got very strong that way, but then I also got a lot of overuse injuries. So then I kind of had to go back to a little bit more moderate approach. I think that where people screw up a lot is there's a few kind of pitfalls, and people get confused, is when people say, well, this worked. Okay, compared to what, right? People say, well, bro, this worked for me. Okay, but that doesn't mean it was the best thing you could have done, right? Like, there's like IFBB pros who they say, well, this worked for me. Well, some of those dudes would grow from looking at a weight. You know what I mean? So, I don't care about the guy I don't want to know the guy's calf routine who had 18-inch calves when he started, and now they're 19 and a half. Right. I want to know the guy who had 11-inch calves who got him to 17.
Right.
That's what I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is there's, when we talk about bros versus science nerds, bros make the mistake of something worked for them as an individual, so they think everybody should do it. And science geeks make the mistake of, because studies only report averages. They say, well, this was the best thing for the average overall, so every individual should do it. And that's also not correct. So I think one of the things I've really tried to do is come to a framework of what do we actually know, right? So we know volume is important. We know periodization is important. We know that training close to failure, but probably not to failure all the time, is important. And then within that, when it comes to exercise selection, sets and reps, those sorts of things, that kind of stuff is kind of a lot of personal preference or what just feels good. Like, for example, if I want to get my quads to grow, I know squats help me, but I know that hack squats tend to do better for me. Now, I don't have any peer-reviewed data to submit for that. I just know from my training experience that worked best for me for getting my quads to grow. Probably because I'm a very posterior chain squatter, I tend to have a lot more forward lean. And so hack squats allows me to get in a position where I actually feel pressing movements in my quads, right? So, but somebody else who's built like a Tom Platz, because I have very long femurs, somebody who can squat more upright, who's going to feel a lot of quad stimulation from squatting, they may grow the best from squats. So within that framework of what do we actually know, everything else is going to kind of have to be by feel until we get more data. And even talking about training to failure, like you brought it up, people squatting and they're squat progressing because they were leaving a few in the tank. I think failure training is so interesting because if you look at one set to failure versus one set not to failure, the set to failure will always produce more muscle growth. And if you look at one workout of taking every set to failure versus not, that workout will produce a greater growth response. But if you look at it on the whole, on actual muscle growth, they show that you start to kind of cap out. And what happens is when you train to failure all the time, it negatively impacts your recovery. So all these bodybuilders who say, well, I can only train my legs once a week because I'm sore for a week after that. Well, one, you're sore for a week because that's what your body is trained to in terms of recovery. If you train more often, your body would actually protect itself and become less sore. And two, you're training every set to failure, so you are hammering your ability to recover. Whereas what is actually better? If you left one or two in the tank and then just took the last set to failure, let's just use it within a workout, right? So if you take somebody and you have them squat their first set, 10 rep max, all out failure. If you have them take the same weight and do another set after that, how many reps are they going to get? maybe like half the same. Like if you actually truly go to a failure on squats, maybe you'll get half of that. And then you do another set, maybe you get 2. You know what I mean? Whereas you're probably going to have them do sets of 7 or 8 and maintain that output for several sets, and then say, okay, on your last set, go to failure, right? Yeah, James Krieger has a very interesting chart he developed. It's kind of this, I think it's like a sigmoidal or a logarithmic graph. I'm going to mix up my terms, but basically showing that once you get to like an RPE or let's say RIR, you probably should be training under a 5 RIR, meaning you're within 5 reps of failure, but you probably shouldn't be going to failure that often. And probably the sweet spot is 1 or 2 RIR, like right around there. But occasionally taking things to failure. But we don't know. It's very wide open research.
You know, I really think it's it could become a dangerous tool, in my opinion. I mean, training to failure is something that we've all done. I also believe that the general public, if they're coming in after sitting in a chair for 10 hours a day and they're not prepped and they're not conditioned, it could be a dangerous tool. Listen, I like to train hard just like you. It's in our blood, and it's something where I think more times than less, I would bet that it's difficult for you to kind of pull the reins back, and you're in there with a group. I trained with a group of about 6-7 people today. We had music blasting. We had our program laid out. You know, there's nothing better, man. It's like, should the workout have gone 50 minutes? No, it went an hour and a half because we were having a blast and we were vibing off of good energy, and you know what I'm talking about. But, you know, the general public isn't like that. And I find if I pull them back a little bit and I allow them and I enable them to feel successful every day when they're leaving, and they're not walking there going, holy shit, Don's going to kick the living crap out of me. I just feel like the long-term sustainability, it's so much better. That's just my opinion.
And that's good too. And you know, I tell people, I'm like, if you have an average everyday client, they don't fail because they didn't have the perfect periodized routine. They fail because they just stopped going.
Yeah.
So I always tell trainers, if you get somebody that's new, first off, do something that they enjoy. Like, make sure they enjoy it. Like, if they don't enjoy it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a back squat is the best thing for muscle growth, for example. If somebody fucking hates it, have them do hack squats or something they actually like and look forward to, because then adherence is going to be better, you know?
Now, this might sound like a stupid question, but people categorize failure. They have different definitions for failure. Yeah. Are you defining failure as technical failure, like technique starts to go racket, or are you literally, you know, or are you literally like collapsing? You know, so does that make sense?
I would say that it's technical failure.
Yeah.
So the number of repetitions that you can complete with appropriate form until you could not perform another repetition with appropriate form, right? So, and here's another good point, is failure to somebody who's very advanced is be very different to somebody who's new, right? Because most people who fail who are new, they don't know how to grind. They don't have the, it is a kind of a, you know, developed from having some guts, you know what I mean? And not fearing going to failure. Because a lot of people who are new will fear that response, right? So they kind of, and you've seen this too, I'm sure, where you've had people, they're like smoking reps, like 4 reps, 5 reps, fail, right? Yeah. Wow. That's very normal for somebody who's new, because the first hint of them feeling like they might miss or it getting really difficult, a lot of times they'll fail or they'll rack it. Whereas like, I know, like, I am a very grinding lifter. I don't smoke anything. I squatted 668 pounds at Worlds, and back warming up, I probably squatted 500 pounds slower than everybody else in that weight class.
I love it.
So it's one of those things where I perceive a high exertion regardless. But I can still work through that because I am a trained athlete. And I know how to grind through that. And I also have the neurological adaptations to grind through that. And actually, they show that advanced lifters have lower velocities on their one rep maximums. You know, I think something like people who are not trained, it's like 0.3 to 0.4 meters per second. Whereas, you know, advanced, like I almost didn't even register on a Tendo on a max one time, you know, because I was so slow. So it's, you know, that's part of it too, is like the perception of failure is different for different people.
Yeah, it was funny. You really kind of reminded me of something with a lot of the newbie lifters, and I really now have a lot of the newbie lifters back squat. There's other ways to skin a cat. I could do a lot of kettlebell work. A front rack position with bells is plenty hard. Frankenstein squatting, Zercher squatting. There's just things I can have them do that's a little bit safer. But a lot of times on the back squat, as they were hitting that, that rep where things, it became a little real. I couldn't even, it was like the repetition got shorter, everything got sloppier. And I'm like, all right, we're done. Let's move on. And I probably learned that rule maybe 10 years ago. It's just very, it takes an experienced, seasoned lifter to be able to really, when you say grind a rep, you know what I'm talking about. It's like set number 2, you're going, wow, I got 3 more to go, 3 more sets to go. And I feel like I'm not going to get a rep more. And you end up figuring out a way to find it. I think that comes from experience.
Yeah. Squat, grinding is a skill. Lifting and doing a grinder is a skill. So it takes time to develop those skills. And that's not something you're going to walk in the gym one day and just have.
Now, a lot of these newbie lifters, there is a training age that I'm trying to make people calm down about. And you've been training for how many years?
Oh, geez. Well, I started lifting weights when I was 14 years old, and I'm 36 now. But I didn't really get consistent and serious with it until I was about 18.
Right. I mean, explain that too. There's muscle maturity. It takes time. This isn't something where the first year, yes, you'll see strength increase, but to actually put true muscle on, can you explain?
Hypertrophy doesn't even start really for about like 12 to 16 weeks of training. So you'll get a lot stronger, but a lot of that's neurological adaptation. You also have really highly elevated rates of protein breakdown when you first start resistance training. And a lot of that is due to the fact that your body is remodeling your skeletal muscle. And then once that protein breakdown starts to kind of go back to a normal level, that's when you start building muscle. But yeah, like I've only put on, like if you look at me when I won my pro card to when I competed as a pro, I looked so different. But the difference in lean body mass was only about 3 pounds.
Wow.
Put that on over a 4-year period, So it just takes time. Most people aren't willing to wait that kind of time, Like I tell people, like people who, I did a post the other day talking about genetics and people who want to complain about genetics when they've been lifting like
I saw that. I saw that post. You started talking. Yeah. Like, come on, man. Stop falling out of grid.
Train your ass off consistently for 10 years and then come bitch to me about genetics. Funny thing is most people who train consistently for 10 years don't bitch about genetics. You
know what, man? It's a big problem is a lot of these influencers out there. Unfortunately, you said it earlier, you have your science geeks and you have your people that it just works for themselves. And, I'm not complaining about it, but it becomes a little bit of a tug of war because you've got people asking you questions now and they say, well, this guy does this and he's not a coach. He didn't spend the last, 20, 30 years of his career trying to become.
Now with Instagram, if you got a 6-pack, you're a coach.
Oh yeah, but that's one of the things I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to hate on these people because at the end of the day, I believe that if a guy in a 6-pack who has a 6-pack can get someone off the couch and motivate them, I'm applauding. But be true to the whole thing also. Like stop, is the ketogenic diet for everyone? I don't know your opinion on it. I Dr. Perlmutter in my chair last week and we had a good conversation about it. And I don't think it is. I'm very weary when someone says this is kind of a one-size-fits-all thing. I already know your answer on that, but a guy's coming to you right now. This is my main question. A guy's coming to you right now and they're saying, I want to get really strong. I want to put muscle on. What are the principles? I know it's going to take time. What are the principles you want me to pay attention to? Can you give them the kind of bullet point list to follow, or her?
The very first thing, the most important thing, by far, consistency. If you don't, you can't gain muscle if you're not in the gym, and you can't lose fat if you're not consistent with your diet. So, when people talk about this diet or that diet, or high carb, low carb, or whatever, it doesn't fucking matter if you can't stick to it. Mm-hmm. So, and people when I was on the Joe Rogan podcast, Joe made a big point about, well, these people just aren't disciplined. And that is part of it. Like you need a certain amount of discipline. But I think the point that I would say Joe maybe missed a little bit was that yes, you need discipline, but I want to get somebody on a diet that requires the minimal amount of discipline for them. And here's why. When do people tend to fail their diets? It's not when they're at home cooking their meals, their life is good, they're healthy, everybody's
stress when they're out of their element. Yeah, when they're out of their element.
So I want something that when somebody has to fall back on it, it's the easiest thing in the world for them to stick to. Because when the shit hits the fan, if your diet requires you to cook every single meal and pre-package it and all that kind of, it's not gonna work. You know what I mean? And if you're waiting, like I told you, if you're waiting to get serious about this to when your life has no stress, well, good luck. You know what I mean? Life is stress. That's just how it is. And especially if you're a motivated, busy person, your life is gonna be. I always tell people, somebody with no stress, and I'll show you a loser. So.
I love that.
There's good stress and there's bad stress, but it's still stress. So, I think that yes, it requires discipline, but let's go to the other end and try to find something that works for people that requires a little. Now, for some people, maybe that is keto because they say, "Hey, I hate tracking calories. I hate doing that, but you know what? If I cut out carbs, I don't really have to think about it, and I eat less just by default." Okay, fine. I'm a libertarian, bro. Do whatever you want,
Sure.
But for some people, that's intermittent fasting, that sort of thing. But don't tell me it's better, right? Just don't try to sell it to me the magic bullet, right? We have now 32 studies in existence that have compared calorie-equated, protein-equated diets that differ in carbs and fats, okay? And the overall consensus, Kevin Hall did a nice meta-analysis of this data. The overall consensus was that there's basically no difference.
Yeah, exactly. I knew you were going to say that too. I already knew it.
There actually was a little bit of difference in favor of fat restriction, actually.
Really? Go figure.
Yeah, like very little. Like basically an extra 26 grams of fat loss per day from fat restriction, which is actually, to me, is not a big physiological benefit. To me, adherence trumps that, right? So if somebody says, hey, I do better on low carb, high fat, it's easier for me to stick to, then that's more important than 26 grams extra fat loss a day if they're able to stick to it. Mm-hmm. And that's probably due to, that may be partly data artifact, but it may also be due to the fact that there's some inefficiencies with de novo lipogenesis and trying to convert carbohydrate to fat. It's not a perfect conversion. So, but the point being is for all practical purposes, there's no difference. So I always tell people, hey, that's great news. So what that means is, you got to control your calories. Probably better to eat higher protein diet, but carbs and fats, you can kind of do what you want, right? So now I will say, I think it's important to people, they stick to kind of a breakdown and don't change it every day, right? Like don't be fluctuating wildly in your carb to fat ratio every day. Try to pick a ratio that you like and stick with that because your body, for lack of a better term, does like to be in a rhythm. But it's kind of like if you had your body upregulates all these different systems depending on what kind of fuel you give it. So it'd be like if you're a yard that builds planes and ships, and you get a big contract for planes, right? And you focus on the planes and you're building planes, and then all of a sudden your plane contract expires and you get a big ship contract. It's not like you're just going to just drop right in, be able to build ships with the same efficiency that you did building planes. Does that make sense?
Right, perfect.
There's going to be a lag time before you're able to do it well at all. And that would be the same thing if you're doing ketogenic diet, but then you're doing high carb, and then you're going back and forth.
Yeah, you're a mess. You're all over the place.
You're going to feel like crap because your body's constantly trying to adapt to it. So I think, pick something that you like and mostly try to stay with it. Now, if you have one day where you're higher carb, lower fat, but you control calories or whatever, not a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. It's mostly about controlling calories. But I do think it's important to kind of pick a ratio that you like and be consistent with.
What about, so you got into diet, you got into, training age, all that stuff. What about listen, all rep schemes, you know, they all work, right? I mean, but you're talking to someone who's really trying to set the foundation for the future. You put it this way, your son's turning to you at 18, 19 years old and says, Dad, I want to follow on your path. What are you designing for him? What's it going to look like?
Oh man.
Interesting question. Sorry. I mean, I've got a kid, so it's
how many hours do you have? So I think, like I said, I'm going to start with adherence. Like, let's, you know, we have to get you to crawl before you can walk. Like, let's teach you about tracking your food intake, like how that works, right? Let's teach you about the basics of exercise. So let's teach you about this stuff. It's just like, I always like to use monetary stuff because I think it's more inherent to people, you know, like if you just start making a little bit of money, it's not a good idea just to go start investing in hedge funds. You know what I mean? Like, put a little bit in your savings account first, you know, and then once you've got a little bit saved up, okay, now maybe we can take some and start investing it in like, you know, conservative mutual funds, those sorts of things. And then once you've built up a large, you know, amount of money, okay, now you can play with it and invest in stuff that's riskier and fancier and all that kind of stuff. But you don't want to do that right from the beginning. Like, you know, no financial advisor or any good one is going to tell you, oh, you've got an extra $2,000, but that's all the money you have. Oh, let's put it in this one single stock and just hope it takes off, right? Now, there's people that do that, and they usually lose their ass. But yeah, you want to crawl before you can walk. It's just like if you were going to school. Like, maybe you wanted to do, I don't know, you want to do, be a doctor, right? You got no math. People like learn arithmetic and like, when am I ever going to need this? It's like, you're going to need it, dude. And even like calculus and stuff, if you don't, you know, you can't sprint before you can walk. You gotta learn. So I would probably focus on teaching him the basics and teaching him the skills and mindset that's important to become successful. Because I think that, you know, I always tell people, if you are successful with lifting weights and you build a good physique, but that's all you get out of it, you really failed. Because weightlifting can teach you so much more about the right mindset to become successful, because I learned about goal setting and perseverance and setbacks and comebacks and all that kind of stuff that helped me in so many other areas of my life. So I would try to impart that stuff to him, and he'll figure all the rest of the shit out. You know what I mean? But it's really like, I think success boils a lot more down to your behaviors and mindset than it does, you know, people who want to make it out like, oh, I didn't lose weight because I was eating carbs. Shut the fuck up. Like,
yeah, enough. You know, it's really, I like to relate it to business. So, you know, start at the finish is kind of a line that I've been using for a while. I stole from Dr. Charlie Weingroff, but you set a business plan, right, for business. An actor, whoever might come in, they might have a specific goal in mind, and we throw the goal on the whiteboard, and then we work backwards and we say, what do we have to do every day to get to that goal? Yeah. Then I go more into the whole micro. I'm sitting there going, all right, today, what do we have to do today? Like, did you get your sleep? How's your digestion? How's your food quality? How's your training? How's your mood? How's your recovery? And we get through today, and then it's like, be grateful for that. Like, that's unbelievable. We wake up tomorrow, we only get 80% of that. Okay, great. Like, we did okay. But the people who are never successful are the ones that dwell on having 10 million bucks in the bank account when they only have 10 grand, and they're never getting there because they're so fixated. It's the same thing with the scale. And and it's complete bullshit. And that's my wish for people. You have a love for this. I have a love for this. Anyone who's been successful in this business have a love for this. And you got to do it. It sounds corny, man, but you got to do it for the love. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned like the big goal you want to get to and relating it to what you have to do today. So there's actually a recent study that came out that looked at a quality called recency. Recency is your how much you value what is right in front of you versus long term. It's kind of like delayed gratification, but not quite. It's basically your ability to integrate things a long term away and understand them and value them, right? So people who have a low level of recency are able to value things that are farther away, right? And they found a very high correlation between people who have low recency and people who have success with weight loss and keeping it off, right? So I would say I'm somebody like that. Like I can look at a long-term goal, but if you only have that long-term goal and you don't break it down into smaller bits, it's going to be really frustrating because you just keep looking at that long-term goal. It looks so far away. So I did this with my Ph.D. My Ph.D. Is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And I wanted to quit so many times. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to quit. And I got to the point where I was so frustrated. I haven't told many people this, but I was not performing well. I had a few failures in my experiments and like didn't even get good data after 2 years. After 2 years of grad school, I had no data. And I just kind of like stopped trying, for lack of a better term. Like I had about a 6-month period where I just didn't really go into lab that much and didn't really try much stuff. And my PhD advisor brought me in, and great dude, didn't get mad at me, didn't yell at me, it just kind of said, listen, for what you want to do, you're in the best university in the world to do this. But PhDs aren't for everybody. So if you aren't going to value this spot, you need to be willing to give it up to somebody who does. And I looked right at him and I said, you know what, you're right, and I'm going to fix it. And I was so far in the tunnel that I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like I'm 2 years in, I don't have any data, and I've got to somehow come up with like 6 publications and shit, you know? So I just said, okay, you know what I'm going to do every day when I come into the lab? I'm going to write down 3 things that I have to get done today. Like, and it might be as simple as ordering a reagent, running something, or writing something. It might be very simple, but I have to do those 3 things today, come hell or high water. I don't care if it takes me 2 hours or 20 hours, I've got to get it done, right? And I did that every single day. I wrote down 3 things I had to get done. And I did that every single day. And I said, you know what, I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I'll actually end up getting a PhD, but I will write down 3 things every day. I will do those things, something that gets me closer. And I will do that for several years. And if I don't get there, at least I know it wasn't because I didn't try.
Right.
And sure enough, right after that was when things started clicking. You know what I mean? It's almost like life will push you right to the brink just to see how much you really want it. You know what I mean? Like just to see how bad you really want it. And then it'll throw you bone. You know, like I had this in business, in my personal life too. Like I got kicked out of the company that I helped start by my other business partners. And, you know, that's just business. It happens, you know. But it was, you know, it basically, it turned into a business dispute that was very costly on multiple front. And there was a time, and I was also going through a divorce at the same time. And there was a time where I owed more to attorneys than I had in my bank account. Like it was not, and it was like, man, but I kept telling myself, because those lessons I learned during grad school and from lifting weights and having injuries and coming back, I said, I kept telling myself, you are going to get through this. Just keep taking it one day at a time. And I'm not saying I never got frustrated. And then there was definitely some tears, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I said, you're going to take this one day at a time and you're going to get through this. But the important thing is right now, when you're in the shit, to keep your feet churning so that when you finally get through this, you're going to be further ahead than if you just given up, you know? So
it's a big lesson in life, man. It really is. I mean, you know, the people I feel like who develop that resiliency and cause it's very easy. I mean, you even see it in social media, you know, I'm not getting likes. I'm like, listen, what are you doing it for? Are you trying to build a business? This doesn't happen in 2 posts. This takes years. Like
Joe Rogan's podcast was the same way.
Yeah.
I had wanted to get on there for about 4 years. And he followed me on Twitter, I think about 4 years ago. I thought, oh, okay, this thing is going to happen, you know, because he was doing a lot of nutrition discussion, and I thought I would have some valuable stuff to contribute. And, you know, after a couple of years, I was kind of like, man, I guess he doesn't want me to be on the podcast. But you know what I did? Instead of like saying, oh, well, that's never going to happen, or I'm kind of stuck at, you know, my level of exposure, I'm just going to keep putting out good content. I'm going to keep banging away. And you know what? Sometimes shit happens when you least expect it. Midnight one night, I got a Twitter message from Joe Rogan, hey, you want to be on the podcast?
You're like, yes. It's huge. It's
like, I waited like 20 minutes trying to play cool. You know what I mean?
I love it. Well, listen.
But, there's a lot of things to be said for just, there's a professor, Angela Duckworth. She has a book called Grit.
I know the book. I read it. Yeah.
I don't want to act like, getting a Ph.D. or anything like. There's some people who go through horrific accidents and whatnot and come back to do amazing things. So I'm not saying I have the most difficult story, because I don't. But one thing I always say to people is, no matter what you're dealing with, somebody came from worse and did better. So,
hell yeah, hell yeah.
Shut your mouth.
Well, listen,
You got your eyesight, you got your hearing.
Yep, that's it. Because our problems, honestly, we're on this podcast right now, and they're really as bad as you think they are at times. They're really not that bad. But listen, man, this was an honor to have you on. I've been following you for the last few years. I'm obviously, in love with this industry, and I love meeting and I love talking to good people. And that's when Derek and I started this podcast, it was just to have a conversation. It was just to get on with people and shoot the shit and have a conversation and connecting good people and just trying to bring good content out there to people who are, I think, really confused in an industry where there's so many different opinions. And you know what? There is no black or white answer. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, listen to your body, food quality, get rest, smile, be happy, and enjoy what you're doing. It's like anything else in life. But listen, this was an honor. I could have spoken to you for another 3 hours, but we try and keep this at about an hour. So we're really pushing the envelope here. But listen, I want to invite you out. If you're ever in New York, man, come host a course at my club. The offer stands.
Awesome.
We'll work it out. I'd love to just listen to you teach and speak and take you out to lunch, and we can.
I've been wanting to do something in New York for a while, so I think.
Well, let's go. You've got a place now. Just let us sit and listen, and you're good to go. So just let me know when you want to do it.
Perfect. I'd love to.
All right, brother. Listen, best of luck to you. Keep leading by example. All right.
All right. Thank you, Don. I appreciate it.
Thank you. No, I appreciate you. Thanks again. Bye-bye.